both of which I'm going to be giving in a week and a half at a big AI conference. But they are separate talks. One is supposed to be 13 minutes, and one is supposed to be 16, so this should work if I speak quickly. First, I will do my introduction to my work in a panel on AI ethics education. I have decided I am going to go to Carnegie Mellon and take Dr. Nurbach's classes about ethics after this. They look really cool, so I'm excited about being on this panel. What I want to talk about is the difference between normative and prescriptive ethics, and why I think it's important that we teach descriptive ethics. I'm then going to talk about how you wedge into an AI class that already has an overfull syllabus a little bit of discussion about ethics, what I think needs to be in there. And then we'll talk about the class that I developed and now has been redeveloped by Dr. Emmanuel Burton, who's currently teaching at the University of Kentucky. So I pulled this out of Wikipedia because everybody should have one Wikipedia slide. The difference between descriptive ethics, which just use ethics to describe situations. I don't love the wording there. People talk about meta-ethics, which asks questions like, why this ethical theory? Where does it come from? What does it do? We're not going to go there today. What you hear most often at AAAI when people say ethics and AI is normative ethics, which try and answer what should the program do, or what should the human do. But often it's about programming ethics into machines or agents. And what we're really doing is applying ethical thinking to problems in computer science, in AI. What I think is we should be teaching people to reason ethically, way before we teach humans. And I have a talk, well, I will have a talk at the conference somewhat after this. Dr. Burton will have a talk somewhat before this presentation about using ethical theories to frame a particular question. You'll see that in a couple of minutes. I think that we should be teaching different ethical theories, not just one. The most common one that you run into is utilitarianism, which asks, how do you maximize the greatest good for the greatest number? And that's always a really fuzzy question, because is my good equal to Dr. Tsui's good? And how do we measure them if we're measuring something other than money, which has its own units? Deontology is rule-based ethics. The rules could be laws, they could be religious laws, they could be personal rules or societal rules. Virtue ethics is perhaps the most interesting because it's the least discussed, at least in my curriculum when I was a student. And that is trying to motivate decisions by who you want to become, by the virtues you wish to embody or to enact. So it has more to do with personal values and personal choices. And these can be used to frame the same decision in very, very different ways. And by framing them differently, the decision becomes different. What is being discussed becomes different. And the values that are applied to make that decision become very different. So the framing changes both the question and the answer. You will see an example of this in my second talk. So if you're trying to get ethics into the AI curriculum, for those of you who've taken the class from me, I didn't do this. I don't live up to my own ideals as much as I wish I did. But I am working to develop better habits, which is part of virtue theory. That you explicitly introduce different ethical theories. And then you should, throughout the curriculum, refer back to them when the issues that you're looking at raise ethical questions. When you're looking at decision-making, planning, what should you be taking into account? And you'll find, as you teach AI, I find at least, that issues arise in the curriculum, they arise in the newspapers, in social media. I overhear conversations walking around campus and elsewhere that I think are very relevant. Last year we talked about hackable data, for instance, and then leave time for students to discuss, to think about, and to interact with each other around these issues. I think that this is very important. What I've done is give very short writing assignments. And as my AI class gets bigger and bigger, that becomes less and less exciting to grade, but it turns out if you don't grade for writing mechanics, it doesn't go, it goes pretty fast. If you're just looking at ideas. So I said that, I mentioned the course that we've been working on that Dr. Burton and myself, Nicholas Matei, and a couple of others are working on a textbook for. We hope to have Course in a Box for you in a couple of years. Based on science fiction, based on fully developed stories, as opposed to the usual ethics textbook, which has these little case studies. Like, Mary Jane goes into work, and her friend Sally says, "Can I use your computer? I just need to send an email, and I don't have my account. I can't remember my password." Should Mary Jane let Sally use her account? Well, what can we say about this case study? It's not very interesting. It's not interesting because we don't know who these people are. We don't care whether Sally, in fact, is going to hack into Mary Jane's business and steal all of their secret data. And furthermore, there's a right answer. And my observation is there's often not a right answer in reality, and often not in stories. And this is why we have spent so much time over the last 5 years reading science fiction stories, looking for ones that raise subtle questions, that don't say, here is the answer. So let me give you an example. A wonderful story which you can go home and find online. It was the winner of a Hugo Award recently, called Cat Pictures, Please. Very short summary. This online agent, I forget what it's supposed to do, develops sentience and decides, for reasons of its own, which people find out if you read the story, to try and help people and increase general utility in the world. So, for instance, one of the humans it is aware of is overweight. So the program sends them recipes and coupons for joining gyms, and gets into their GPS and routes them so they keep driving by the gym. And they don't join. But it has better luck, I think, doing some matchmaking and introducing people. So at the end of the story, it's tried 3 experiments and 2 of them have worked. It's pretty pleased. What issues does this raise? Well, I've sort of put the answers up there. Some of the answers. Privacy. Do you want a sentient agent reading your emails and your medical reports and listening to your phone conversations? Because, of course, everything's voice over IP. Do you want a sentient agent or non-sentient agent trying to manipulate you, trying to make you lose weight, lower your blood pressure, match you up with somebody that you wouldn't otherwise date? Maybe. And if you think that manipulation by machine agents isn't a thing, there was a recent document from the European Union about ethical issues in AI that specifically raises this. I don't have the link, I should. There are also some really interesting AI issues that have enormous ethical ramification of how do we program an agent to parse social cues? Should we program an agent to parse social cues? So if somebody says, wow, I really want to lose weight, do they mean it? Wow, I wish I had a girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. Do they mean it? Are they saying they want help? These are subtle things that humans aren't necessarily very good at. Should we have agents doing that? I've left out all of the parts of the story that make it interesting and memorable. I do encourage you to read it. It's a very short story. It'll take you 10 to 20 minutes, I think. But what's good about stories is that they're memorable. That particular one is funny. Some are sad. Some draw you in and connect. And if you've done anything with cognitive science, you're probably aware that emotional reactions reinforce memory. Do I want students to remember the particular stories? That's not the point. I want them to remember the discussions. And we have this weird way of remembering through connection. So if you are in a situation where you have to make a decision, you perceive that there's an ethical problem. If you can remember a story that's somehow related and what we talked about in class, what you wrote in the paper, what your friends wrote in their papers and talked to you about, then you've got the tools more accessible for framing the problem. Now, some people teach their ethics classes straight out of the media. And I think that there's some fabulous ways, benefits to doing that, to looking at the things that are going on right now. But I find that students come in with prejudices, with having already made up their mind about what's right and what's wrong for the things that they're reading about in social media or in the news media. The nice thing about stories is that even though they connect on an emotional level, there's this distance of saying it's just fiction. So you can talk about it and you can analyze it safely without challenging what you believe politically or socially. So I think that this is a way to get at ethical reasoning, as well as emotional reasoning, that can be more effective. I will have just submitted a grant proposal to actually study that claim. Any questions? This is the end of my introduction to the panel. Okay. So, earlier it said read my blue sky paper. Here's the blue sky paper.
Wait.
Yes?
I had a comment on the last presentation.
Yes.
There's also a good audio version of a fictional story.
That particular story?
Yeah, the
Okay.
sending
Cool. Search for cat pictures, please. Okay. So, different talk, different audience, except possibly not. That was in the education track. This is in the senior member track. So I want to try and argue, first of all, that it is important to teach ethics to AI practitioners. Secondly, that teaching ethical theories allows us to frame ethical decisions. And I will talk about a particular ethical decision. What I'm not going to talk about is ethical theories tell us the answer, because because they don't. So, to say that again, this is not about finding the right answer. It's about framing what the question is. It's about descriptive ethics rather than prescriptive, about how do you use ethical theories to describe the problem rather than how do you use them to find the answer. And this is not about how to program autonomous vehicles to solve the trolley problem, for instance, or to wage a just war if such a thing exists. So here's what I want to talk about. Here's a decision that many AI practitioners made a year or two ago. In the summer of 2015, an open letter was announced at one of the big AI conferences, UKY, the big summer AI conference. And many people signed it. The sort of summary is, we don't want to work on applying AI to weapons. I will say weaponized AI, I will say AI to weapons. I will also use the term that most people use to talk about this, which was robots that kill. So the question I want to look at is, should I sign the letter? Should one sign the letter? And I want to use the different theories to frame that question. So, utilitarianism, seeking the greatest good for the greatest possible number. What makes utilitarianism hard, one of the things that makes it hard, is figuring out who is affected by a decision. Figuring out how to scope that calculation. The other thing that makes it hard is doing the calculation. What does it mean that somebody else should just, utility increases, how much does it increase if I make this decision or that? Deontology comes from the Greek for duty or obligation and is law or rule-based. So actions are ethical if they are congruent to a law, if they don't break the law. And these laws can be civil, they can be religious, they can come from Kant's moral law, which he believes that the more generalized the rule is, the more it applies to everyone, the more universal. So an example of a rule that is not generalized is you should drive on the right-hand side of the street, which applies in the US but does not apply in the United Kingdom, as a for instance. So not a moral obligation, and yet it has ethical implications because if you drive on the wrong side, whichever side is wrong, you put lives at risk. Virtue ethics is focused on character and on development of virtues. For instance, humility or honesty or courage. Honesty and courage are actually interesting ones in this context. And we don't look at a particular action, but we look at the set of actions over time and say, is this person ethical? Are they acting in a way that establishes habits that lead to acting according to these virtues? So, going back to the question, should I sign the letter? Which says, among other things, I will not work on weaponizing AI, putting AI into weapons. Will that affect my ability to get funding from the military? It could. Since I do AI and they build weapons, it probably could. Not necessarily, but going to have an effect on the way war is waged, which has consequences, changes the utility for the people who wage war, and it changes the utility for the people on whom war is waged. But more locally, how does this, my decision to sign this letter going to affect department politics? What if my boss thinks that I should, or my boss thinks that I shouldn't sign it? How will that affect the way I am treated at work, as a for instance? How will it affect students if they see my name on this public petition? Will it distance them from me if they disagree? Will that affect my effectiveness as a teacher? So who are the stakeholders? Clearly the people on whom war is waged and the people who wage war, but also my students, if it affects my ability to give grants. Other entities whose reputation may depend on mine in some way, whether other signers of the document or other people associated with me who will be raised up or lowered in various people's eyes by my signing. How about my family, if it affects my employment, if it affects my effectiveness, and if it affects how I think about myself, the people I live with will be affected. So scope is a complicated matter. That's a utilitarian analysis. In deontology, what are the laws that apply? So the first law, which I don't mention here, is that I live in the US where, at the moment, we have the freedom to do so. It is not against any law or social expectation for me to not sign. I'm not supposed to sign it as a representative of my university, but I can sign it for myself. Okay. There's also the laws that make me think signing it would be good or bad. If I believe thou shalt not kill, then thou shalt not work on weapons that kill. Seems a natural corollary. If I think that there are times, such as World War II, when war is necessary, then maybe I want to have smart weapons. Maybe I think that they will be better for, the war will be cleaner somehow. I might already be funded by the military. I might already work in an organization where I'm expected to not sign. Or I might work in an organization where I am expected to sign. So I have to weigh the loyalty to those entities. I might feel it is my patriotic duty to do one or the other, to sign or not sign, depending on what I perceive that the patros believes. I list pacifism as different than thou shalt not kill because pacifism is about all forms of violence, not just death, but it applies similarly. And finally, in virtue ethics, what are the virtues that are at stake here? Do I want to lead the protest, lead the movement? Do I want to be at least visible in the movement? Is that about courage? Is that about pacifism? Is that about ego? Do I want to seem like I'm a team player? And again, that could go either way. Have the people in my team, whatever I conceive that to be, sign? Do I want to be part of the team that built this open letter? They're sort of high profile these days. Do I want to be the responsible professor who can fund her students? Is that one of the virtues that I see? So, all of these are not giving me clear answers. None of these are giving me clear answers. But I'm saying that by framing these questions in different ethical theories, I'm asking different questions. Again, I come back to the question of how I'm going to be seen, which is part of virtue ethics. Questions? So there are many ethical dilemmas. We chose this one because I thought some of the audience may have made that decision or at least struggled with it. From the people I talked to, it was a fairly easy decision for many of them. Maybe having ethical theories just makes your life more complicated. I would like to think that looking back, it makes you feel better about the decisions you made. I mentioned the trolley problem in my previous talk. The questions of who to hit if a self-driving vehicle has to choose between, let's say, the Pokemon Go player that just stepped out into the street obliviously and the person on the sidewalk. Corey Seiler pointed out there might be times if you know what the car is going to do when it is safest to run into the street. There are issues of privacy that come up in lots of AI applications and data mining. There are issues of targeted advertising and which goes to manipulation of privacy and perhaps surveillance. And there are all the issues that arise when sentience arises. And this may be good, this may be bad. One step forward, one step back, and three in place. So my point here is that ethical theories help us frame our choices, and they provide analytic tools. Not necessarily answers, but at least tools for thinking about the topics. And that having different analytic theories, different frameworks, complicates things, yes. But they give weight to our deliberations, they help us think about what's right. And I think that the issues that we are facing really require this kind of thought. So, I want to acknowledge Nicholas Mattei, without whom this whole research project of looking at AI and ethics the way that Dr. Burton and I have done would not have happened. And I also want to thank the National Science Foundation for partially funding this work. And thank you for your attention.
Well, that's quite interesting. I bet none of you has recently had any courses in ethics and couldn't have told before this what are these three theories and what's a fourth theory of ethics. So
Actually, I see it.
some of you might have taken Dr. Goldsmith's course. But other than that, I haven't seen this thing for a long time. I do remember Immanuel Kant and the categorical imperative. And I like your description much better than what I had as a freshman in college, which tried to define it. All right, well, I'm sure you have things to discuss. You're all here, you can discuss it. But I'm leaving. We're now finished with today's Keeping Current. Dr. Goldsmith might be around for a while. Dr. Sweet might be around for a while. And we'll see each other next week for the next Keeping